Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining the Admit One podcast, where we talk to students who have successfully navigated the college admission process and earned their ticket to college. Today, we are talking with Lewis, who is a 2024 graduate of Belmont High School in Massachusetts, and he'll be attending Harvard University in the fall. Lewis, thanks so much for taking the time. Excited to talk to you a little bit about your journey through high school, what you learned, and obviously what made you successful in the admission process, where you ended up being admitted to Harvard. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So let's just start by kind of talking a little bit about where you grew up. Tell me a little bit about like your high school and maybe some of the classes that you took in high school, and we can kind of take the conversation from there.
Sure. Yeah. So I pretty much grew up in Belmont. I've always been in the Belmont public school system, and my high school is like a medium size. It's about 300 plus students in my class. As for classes, our school offers a good amount of AP classes and honors, and so I pretty much just like took whatever seemed like right for me. There's a bunch of different subjects that I was interested in. There wasn't like one thing that stuck out to me.
And what about like early on in high school? Some schools will have like restrictions on the number of APs and advanced courses. Did you have that kind of situation where there challenges with like developing what your curriculum was?
So not really, but freshman year, like there were no APs offered. And then it's kind of just like every year there's a limited number of AP classes offered, but there was like a good amount in total. I think I had like over 10, so it was like perfectly fine.
Yeah. And for when you were like entering high school, did you have particular areas academically that you liked more than others? Or were you pretty much like across the board, you were interested in a lot of different areas?
Yeah, I think I was a lot more interested in math, but I've always been interested in like a bunch of different stuff. So yeah, it was like kind of all across the board too.
Yeah. And if you can think back to like at the beginning of high school, did you have goals of attending like really competitive colleges? Had you thought about colleges at all? Was that like not even remotely on your radar? Like what was that kind of process like?
Yeah, so I did think like a little bit about colleges, but I didn't really have any goals or anything. I honestly thought I didn't really have a chance at like a top school or like an Ivy League when I was a freshman. And yeah, I didn't really start thinking about it until more closer to junior year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then as you get in towards like junior year, what is it? Is it like you're consistently doing really well academically and like testing is strong? Like what kind of like shifts that perspective for you to think like, no, maybe I have a shot at some of like the most competitive schools?
Yeah, I think something big for me was, of course, on top of like getting good grades and good test scores, is just like having like some older friends also go through the process and have good results. And that kind of like made me a little more confident when seeing them get into like good schools. So that kind of helped.
Yeah. I mean, it tends to, if you see people who are successful in things and you relate to them, it's like, oh, well, I think might be able to do this too. Did that realization, did that like change maybe the way that you approach things at all? Or were you like more strategic in the ways that you were doing things, whether it's like academically or from an extracurricular standpoint?
Not really, but a lot of my activities were activities that I've been doing since I was like a little kid. So I kind of stuck with those. I might have like tried to get some more like maybe leadership positions in my activities, but yeah, I kind of just like was myself.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that you're doing, because you'd said like a lot of the things that you did, like you'd done them throughout the entirety of your life, and they certainly like take shape and they develop a little bit in different ways. But talk a little bit about what were some of like the primary things that you were doing from an extracurricular standpoint.
Yeah, so I think the big like three things that I did was chess, math, and then baseball. So those were all stuff that I did since like elementary school. So yeah, I was like a member of chess club, like math team, baseball team, and I also also worked with chess and math a lot outside of school.
Talk a little bit about that and sort of how that developed, because I think I work with a lot of kids, or have met a lot of kids over the years, who they'll say things like those three areas I hear all the time. I love math, I love chess, I love sports. Like, but then how do you sort of engage in them in a way that you feel like differentiated you within the admission process, and how did you sort of elevate what your overall engagement was with those areas?
Yeah, so for chess, especially, I've been playing in tournaments for a while. I wasn't like the best player, but I think what really like helped me stand out was in my sophomore year, I started the Massachusetts High School Chess League, and that now has like over 20 schools and like 200 members. So I think that really helped stand out. And then
Yeah.
also for math, I was teaching math at some point, and I also coached like the middle school math team. And that hadn't been a thing before. So
Yeah.
I think those kinds of activities really helped.
I definitely think that that's accurate. Let's talk a little bit about your ability, well, like when you start the Massachusetts High School Chess League. Like, walk me through the thought process there, like logistics, what needed to go into this, because it definitely is a key part of like what your overall story is, and just a demonstration of your ability to think critically and to kind of like hit the ground and get things done on a ground level. So talk to me a little bit about like, how did that come about, and what were some of the like logistics to getting that started?
Right, yeah. So I first had the idea back, it was during the pandemic, like everyone was inside and chess was becoming a lot more popular. I don't know if you saw it, but like The Queen's Gambit is a Netflix
I mean,
show.
come on. Of course I've seen the
Yeah.
Queen's Gambit. Yeah. I watched it probably twice over, of course.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So I think that, and combined with the pandemic, that really helped boost online chess's popularity. So yeah, a lot of my friends started playing chess, and I was like, there should be some form of like organized play where everyone has a chance to play chess like they're playing a sport. For sports, different schools play against each other. So yeah, I was like, why not? Why don't we have that for chess? And I think I started reaching out to some of my friends my freshman year, and
Like
it
at
was
other
honestly pretty.
schools?
Yeah, at other schools, just like people that I'd met through playing in chess tournaments
Yeah.
when I was younger. But it was honestly kind of hard because a lot of them ended up not really being that involved with the chess clubs at their schools, and yeah, so it kind of like slowed down for a little bit, and then I picked it back up sophomore year when school was getting back in person, and
Yeah.
then like chess clubs were back in person, and then like I started to just like email chess clubs at schools like in my area, and yeah, we started out with some online tournaments. Our first season was just like online. It was about 7 schools, and then we eventually started to move in person. Like
And
getting
did
a
you need to
location.
get like,
Yeah.
like, did you need to go through any like red tape with different schools and like get approval from stuff, or was it pretty much just through the chess clubs at the school, and they like were able to get it running pretty easily?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I wanted to avoid like the whole process with dealing with like school administration and that stuff. So I just reached out to the students directly. I was like, you don't really have to be even involved or like associated with your school.
Yeah.
I just want you and other students to join.
Yeah.
So it's like that.
See, I think that's an important note for kids sometimes, because what I hear a lot of times is like, oh, my school won't let me do this, or there's this process that I have to go through. I mean, I understand to some degree that sometimes you have to go through, the bureaucracy of the high school or whatever, but there's also plenty of times where you can just run it independently. Nobody's going to be able to stop you from doing something. And it's not like you're, doing something that's not a positive. It's you're having chess tournaments and allowing people to compete on a regional basis, which is obviously admirable in and of itself. So then you start to get some people involved, and then like, how does it start to grow? Because I mean, by the end of it, you have lots of schools that are involved. So how does that kind of start to take shape?
Yeah, it was a lot for sure. I remember like having to make like a website. That definitely helped, and then creating my own kind of management team with students from different schools, and then having them also reach out to some other people, and yeah, that it kind of like took off from there. We also have just like a Discord server where people can talk, and
then
it just like kept growing.
Did the tournaments then become like in person? Like, or did you have to like rent out facilities and stuff like that? Or how did that work?
I think our second season, we started going in person, and I talked to the Boylston Chess Club. It's a chess club in Boston, and I used to play there when I was younger, so I kind of knew the president. So I reached out to him, and he was like, yeah, sure, why not? Because we're like promoting the game, and so he just let us use their space. Our tournaments were only about like once a month, so we didn't really take up too much of their time, and yeah, it was awesome.
That's great. If you don't ask, then you're probably not going to get the answer that you want. So that's a good lesson to be had, which is great. And then talk to me a little bit about like your involvement with math. You had said you taught math a little bit, and like, so walk me through what was kind of the trajectory for you there in pursuing like competitive math, and then also teaching and all of those kinds of things.
Right. So yeah, in middle school, I started doing competitive math, and again, like wasn't exactly the greatest, but I also had some friends that were also pretty like passionate about math, and so we had a lot of fun on the middle school math team, but it wasn't really like organized at all. Like the teacher didn't really have a lot of competition math experience. So when we got to high school, we wanted to kind of change things up, and so we volunteered to be the coaches of the math team and help create like lessons, like organize events, that kind of thing. And so that was a big part of it. Just me and my friends, just reaching out to the teacher and getting that started.
See, I think both of these things are very good examples to me of establishing like innovative, unique extracurriculars that the admission officer hasn't seen before. But I think sometimes kids have this perception that you need to do some like extraordinary thing, like you need to write the next great American novel, or like some win a science fair or something like that. And the reality is like, what they're really looking for, in my experience, is somebody who's able to demonstrate their ability to think critically, to see gaps or see holes in the things that they've done, and then just like make it easier and more equitable and accessible for future generations and for future groups. So I think for you, for both of these things, it feels like a lot of them kind of like fell into place relatively easily for you, but it took you having the initiative to go ahead and do those things, which other people were not doing. So I think that to me, that's a really big lesson that I hope that kids take out of this, is that you don't need to, find a cure for cancer tomorrow or anything like that. It's just more of trying to identify ways to do things in unique ways that then you're able to present effectively within the admission process. So you do a great job with that. Talk to me a little bit about like your school list and how that got developed, and what was like your approach when you're thinking about applying. Harvard has restricted early action, so you can only apply there, and you can apply to state institutions, but you can't apply anywhere else. Early decision. Did you use the REA? Did you do regular decision? Like what was kind of your approach as you headed into it? And did you give other schools like the thought of like, maybe I would apply ED somewhere and that sort of thing?
Right. Yeah. So it was a tough decision. I did end up applying Harvard REA, but yeah, that wasn't like always the plan. I didn't really like have a final decision until like maybe a few weeks before the deadline. I did consider EDing to other schools like maybe UPenn, I think was maybe there, or Brown, Duke,
Sure.
schools like that. I had like a long list because I didn't really know exactly like what I was looking for, but
Yeah.
I knew that I would be able to fit in a lot of places, so I had somewhat of a long list. But I ended up like just wanting to shoot my shot with Harvard because it was my top choice for sure at the time.
Makes sense. And I think that one of the things that I talk about now a lot with school lists is we'll hear people that'll say things like, what is this I want to develop, what my school list is, what I want to know the whole thing. I don't really look at it as like the whole list. I look at it more for like, what's your strategy? So if you're going to apply restricted early action to Harvard and you're going to shoot your shot, is the great way to put it, then that also means that, okay, you can only apply to state institutions during the early period. So then that just basically makes your decision on what your early list is, because you're only applying to other state institutions that you're interested in. And then that theoretically would change what you do for like regular decision or early decision. But the admit rates at the most selective schools for regular decision are so low that it's almost more important to understand what are you doing during that early period. And it sounds like you gave, the thought process of, okay, do I want to do an ED somewhere? Or does it make more sense from a REA standpoint? And so let's talk a little bit about kind of the strategy or approach that you have as you get into like putting together your application. And Harvard's got a handful of questions that they're asking from a supplemental standpoint. What was the sort of strategy or mindset that you had as you start putting together, your Common App essay and your supplementals and your activity list? Are there key elements that you're trying to focus on? Are there things that you feel like are at a really high level? Or are you just trying to like respond to the prompts and be as authentic as possible?
Yeah. So I think like a big part of it was just starting early, and getting like all the ideas out there, and figuring out what I wanted to talk about. Like at least for the Common App essay, I talked about my work with the Massachusetts High School Chess League because I thought that was like the most important activity to me, and that one was kind of an easy choice. And there were a lot of like extracurriculars that were meaningful to me, and I just wanted a bunch of them to be represented in my supplementals. There were 5, which ended up working out nice for me. I know I talked about the math coaching. There's something else about math competitions. Another one with like Belmont free lessons, and like a few different stuff.
Yeah, you talk a couple of them. You talk about math. So you're talking about the math team and coaching, and then you also talk about and I think that you do a good job in talking about like in COVID, you're trying to figure out what to do, and so then you just start diving through the Art of Problem Solving Volume 1. Like, all right, let's get into this a little bit. And so I think that shows like an authentic love of learning to me. I didn't have anything else going on during COVID, so I'm going to dive into this extensive math textbook and try to knock out as much as possible. And then you do a good job sort of like talking about how that evolves and how you start to think differently about different problems and sort of merging different spaces and things like that, which I think is very important. The other thing that you do a really good job with is there's a question about how do you hope to use a Harvard education in the future, and you merge a lot of the things that you've done with what Harvard is offering and programmatically what's available. Do you remember, like, as you're researching to write that question, do you remember like what your approach was or what you were trying to think about, or like, were you just looking for things that aligned with what you did that are prevalent at Harvard?
Right. So I knew that I had like a lot of different interests, and I wanted to play into that. And because I know that Harvard has flexible academics, interdisciplinary learning is important to them. So that's what I talked about. I didn't want to just focus on one academic subject. And yeah, I also did want to build off of my previous activities and mention them in my essays and how I would continue them at Harvard.
Yeah. You do a good job with that in this one because a lot of times when I read these, like, why do you want to go here types of essays, what they end up reading like is just sort of the student spent 15 minutes looking at the website and found a couple professors and they just kind of throw them in there. For yours, it's very clear about what your areas of focus are. You talk a lot about, your involvement with chess and with math and all of those things. And then you're aligning that with the opportunities that are available at the school. So, for anybody who's listening, as they start to think a little bit about how they should approach one of these essays, it's not just simply finding information on the website about the school or about a professor, but rather you want to be able to talk a little bit more in detail about what you've done through high school and how does that align with what you want to do as you get ready to enter college. And it's no different than like a job. If you're applying for a job somewhere and you just have a generic cover letter, then you're probably not going to get an interview. But if you're able to sort of align the experiences and background that you have with what the school or the employer is offering, that's really what you're going to be, what's going to stand out. So I think that's the biggest thing for anybody who's starting to think a little bit about those types of questions. Do you feel like you would do anything differently as far as your application? Obviously it went well for you, so I don't imagine that you have too much more, but sort of like looking back on it, do you feel like there was anything that maybe you would have done differently or that you wish you had highlighted more or anything of that nature?
It's a good question. I honestly no, because I would be afraid that it would change the result. So yeah, I would have to say no to that.
Fair. That's very fair. Very reasonable. And so when you get your acceptance letter from Harvard back, are you done, or are you thinking like, I'm going to still apply to places, regular decision? Like, what was kind of your approach? Because I think a lot of people's organic reaction would be like, okay, great, I'm going to Harvard, I'm done. But did you give other applications and submit those, or like what was kind of the thought process there?
Yeah, no, I was one of those like people. After I got into Harvard, I was like, this is my top choice. I think I'm done. I actually did submit other applications before I got the acceptance, but I ended up withdrawing them because I just felt like I knew I was going to Harvard. I wanted maybe to like give my friends like a bigger shot, if that makes a difference at all. But I did apply to a safety school, UMass Amherst, and those were the only two schools I ended up applying to.
Yeah. And then one thing I want to, that I don't feel like I've talked about on this podcast before, is like, talk to me about what your testing timeline was. So do you remember like when you started preparing for the SAT? Do you remember when you first took the SAT? Like, what was kind of the cadence of that for you over the course of high school?
Yeah. So I first took the SAT, the August after my sophomore year. So it might be a little earlier than a lot of people, but I felt that
like entering junior year.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you do like formal test prep at that point, or is it like Khan Academy kind of stuff? And
yeah, Khan Academy. So I wanted to just first of all take one practice test during the summer and see like what score I get, and if I'm happy with that, then like I felt that there was no need to do test prep, and that's what ended up happening.
Yep. So you took it once and you were done.
Oh, actually, no. I took the SAT twice. My first score was like pretty good, but I just like felt like I could do better. So
you took it in August and then what again, like in November kind of a thing?
I think it was October. Yeah.
Okay. So pretty early on. Yeah. I mean, I think, it really depends on the student. After grade 10, like entering grade 11 is probably typically like the earliest that I would recommend. But if you're doing practice tests and you're doing really well on them, then I don't have any problem with a student taking them and just knocking it out. Sometimes I'll get kids who their parents will want them to take it like in grade 10 or right after grade 9, like to see where they are. I don't recommend that at all. There's a lot of reasons behind that. One of the things I would say though is like, you don't want to take the test more than 3 times. It also can oftentimes put a lot of pressure on the student as they move through high school. And if they don't get the score that they wanted, then that sometimes makes them even more anxious and nervous about taking it as they move through. So my recommendation is typically like fall of grade 11. And then in your case, if you're scoring pretty close to where you want to be anyway, then take it again, in October. That's not a problem. But if you need a little bit more time to prepare, then taking it again in the spring gives you 6 months or so to be able to do a little bit more formal test prep. So I think that's good. It's definitely good to wait until, especially at least the beginning of junior year. And then tell me a little bit about baseball, because that's also another part of your profile that I think is sometimes I think the student, and I talk about this sometimes, it's like, if you're not necessarily getting recruited, then it's probably not going to be like a huge part of what your elite narrative is. But I also think it plays a role in the review, and it plays a role in who you are as an individual. So talk to me a little bit about kind of your involvement there, and what role do you think that played in the review?
Right, yeah. So I played club baseball too, but wasn't like that serious of a player. Again, like not getting recruited. I made the varsity team, but like wasn't a captain. But I still found a way to like make an impact somehow, and I thought that may have helped because, for example, like my freshman year, we had a team fundraiser, and I ended up raising the most money, just mostly through door-to-door selling. So, like, even though I wasn't the best player, like, I found a way to make an impact on the team through another way. So, yeah, I thought.
And that's also part of, like, what it is, not everybody's going to get recruited, right? It's like 2%, 3% of high school baseball players end up playing NCAA at any level. And so it's really more about how are you leveraging the resources that you have and doing things that are different. And so, to be able to have that as part of your narrative, I think is really important. Cool. Well, we're running a little low on time, but I generally like to ask and get a better understanding. Like if you could give any piece of advice, kind of looking back at things, and now you're a year removed from probably when you first started writing essays and conceptualizing your list and all of that. What would be like a piece of advice that you would give somebody who's starting that process now, and it probably feels pretty daunting as they get started. So what would be like one piece of advice that you would give?
Yeah, I would say like definitely start early, and really be organized throughout the whole process. Because if you start early, I think that just makes everything a lot less stressful, and your application is going to look better the more time you spend on it. But also another part of it is just like really get excited about the schools that you're applying to. And if that happens, at least I found that made the whole process a lot less stressful than I thought it would, because, I was like pretty happy with my school list, and it worked out.
Absolutely. Cool. Well, thanks, Lewis. This is super helpful, and looking forward to getting people to hear your episode and learn a little bit more about your journey, and then they can take that and kind of apply it to their own lives. And so thanks for taking the time. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this week, and looking forward to another episode next week.
Thank you so much.